Hello, everyone, and welcome to Concordia University's fourth space. Thank you for joining us for today's event, Black Studies at Concordia, Session 2. We would like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Here at Fourth Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge by co-creating daily activities that examine research questions and projects in development across the university. We are running today's event as a live stream to YouTube and a Zoom meeting. For those of you joining us on Zoom, we welcome your comments and questions with a raised hand or via the chat. And for those of you in the space, we welcome comments and questions. And if you'd like to participate, just let us know by raising a hand and we'll get a microphone to you. With that, it is my pleasure to hand the microphone over to the Program Director of the Black and African Diaspora Studies in the Canadian context and Senior Lecturer in Communication Studies, Dr. Christiana Abraham. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. On behalf of Angelique Wilkie, Special Advisor to the Provost on Black Integration and Knowledges, who is not able to be here with us in presence today, and Badewa Ajibade, coordinator of the series, I would like to warmly welcome all of you to the second iteration of this special series. I know some of you are joining us online, and STM is not helping us, but those of you in the room and those of you online. The Black Studies Speaker Series is a year-long event that features Black Studies scholars and researchers at Concordia University. The series coincides with the launch of the minor in Black and African Diaspora Studies in the Canadian context, which was done in the fall of 2025. So as you know, this is an extra special year for us as we continue to launch the program, and we welcome the new minor. And this is one of the activities we're doing to do this. So about the minor, this minor is, of course, a 24-credit program that responds to a long-standing demand from students at this university and its founding institutions. And it is geared at enhancing curriculum offerings at the university, decolonizing the curriculum, and introducing students to the exciting world of Black knowledges in its transnational and African diasporic groundings. So the aim of the series is to highlight some key Black studies scholars and researchers at Concordia and their scholarship, and will include participation of doctoral students and postdoctoral fellows as well. It is expected to expose students in the minor and in the wider student body to the growing field of Black Canadian studies. The series highlights original works, debates, and creative practices of key researchers, as you will see, those who are working in the field, and those whose work deal with the interdisciplinary range of diverse and dynamic subjects that speak to Black studies and its situatedness in the Canadian context. And I think today we'll see this kind of range on display right here. So just before, I don't want to go on for too long, but just before starting, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of those who have made this series possible. And I especially want to thank the Dean's Office in the Faculty of Arts and Science, and as well as the Fourth Space for accommodating us here today. And that said, I am thrilled to welcome our guest presenters, so we'll get the introductions in a moment, who are here with us today. I'm thrilled to also welcome all of you, in particular students and members of Montreal's Black communities, and of course, members of the Concordia community. So on this note, I'd like to bid you a good day and to say, well, enjoy today's session. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Christiana Abraham. Welcome to the second section of Black African Speaker Series. Today is the second section and it continues till next year. My name is Denis Tibble-Bissong. I'm a second year PhD student. Looking at my research interest, looking at marginalized women accused of practicing witchcraft in Ghana. I'm trying to dissect the modernity culture and then global perspective of witchcraft accusation in northern Ghana. Before I introduce our speakers, I'll first of all have to acknowledge, honor our ancestors, through whom we are here today, through whom we recognize Blacks and Africans on this land. We call upon our ancestors, remembering all who came before us. We honor you, our African ancestors, who paved the way for us in diaspora in the motherland. Cattle of civilization, Mother Africa, your bodies, blood, flesh, and bones, then and now, nourish the earth and color great and small, fresh and salted water. Africa, Caribbean, and Black people, no matter where in the world we are, share a common bond of courage, determination, indomitable spirit of greatness, and we acknowledge our differences and similarities embedded in the bloodlines of kings and queens, inventors, warriors, and philosophers. Some of you endure the brutality of transatlantic enslavement, forced to give free labor, build nation states worldwide in their bare backs, and still manage to be victorious in achievement. We honor you today and call on your wounds and triumphant spirit to share the space and bask in our glory of you, all of four mothers, fathers, parents, and relationships. We know that you fought alongside the indigenous peoples, years for freedoms, so we know that our liberation is tied to the liberation of the indigenous people across the Turtle Islands and the world. We cannot ever liberate if our indigenous relation remains in bondage under the tyranny of historical and modern colonialism. We will not let your toil and service to humanity and Black peoples go in vain. So we carry on in your footsteps, reaching for higher highs, creating memories and deeper prayers for those of us here and now, babies unfertile, yet to become. Thank you very much. Just go straight to introduce our guests, speakers, our conversation for today. This is the order of the program. We have Associate Professor Dr. Huda Hassan, who is going to talk about her research, and Huda is a writer, a cultural critic, and assistant professor at Concordia University Department of Geography, Planning, and Environment. Previously, an assistant professor at New York University Media, Culture, Communication Department. Her work deploys methods for media studies, Black diaspora cultural studies, musicology, transnational feminism. Her cultural criticism appears in various publications, including New York Magazine, The Globe and Mail, Pitchfork, and CBC. She is frequently guest critic on CBC Commotion. Her research project, Harlem Roses, African Seafarers of the Harlem Renaissance, examines African diaspora sensibility in the 1920s Harlem, shaped by the Great Migration, the growing influence of Pan-Africanism, the repeated movement of African seafarers, and time of universal excitement, as described by poet Claude McKay. Her forthcoming debut book, Children of the Snow, 2027, is a collection of essays and the connection between cities and grief. Please, let's put our hands together for Dr. Huda Hassan. Our next guest speaker is Jean-Claude Bostro. He's a self-taught photographer, investigator in the reportage style, but quickly shifts to a more formal and abstract approach to images. He exhibits his work in Montreal and abroad, becomes part of the Diaspora collective. He studied film production at Concordia University, where he developed a practice of experimental filmmaking focused on recycling archival and found footage. Some of his films, such as La Queue Tigre du Cha, Zero Gravity, and River O, make their mark. They have been screened in hundreds of venues and are part of Benin Film School Secular, and have been exhibited in major retrospectives such as the Landmark, the Cinema of Canada, at the Centre Georges Pompidou in Paris, and Cinema Recycle at the Galerie du Jeu de Paume in Paris. His film L'Aquille Tigre du Chat is named one of the 200 must-see films in Quebec cinema. He is a professor at the Mel Hopingham School of Cinema since 2001, where he was recipient of the Distinguished Teaching Award. He's a founding member of the Hexagram Research, where he was active until 2011. With his longtime research partner and computer engineer, Mohamed Hakib, he has spent the last 3 years developing an immense installation based on the Middle Passage ship crossing. The installation is an initiative undertaken alongside the new Port Middle Passage Port Maker project, who have been working on the construction of memorial in towns of Newport, Rhode Island in the US. Please, let's put our hands together to Ian Clark. This is the order of the program. Dr. Huda will present, and then we'll allow all of them to present. Then Q&A will come in later because we are constrained with time. We'll give them room to present. Each of them have 40 minutes to make their presentation. Then afterwards, have Q&A sections. Thank you. So, Dr. Huda, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you guys for being here. I really want to thank Badiwa, Dr. Christiana Abraham, as well as Angelique Wilkie for helping to create this space, but also to help disseminate critical research in Black studies that's manifesting and happening here at Concordia. I'm also grateful to be sitting here with Jean-Claude and Denise Tabile as well, too, for the second iteration of this talk series. So today I'll be sharing some notes for my second book project, Harlem Roses, African Seafarers of the Renaissance. And drawing on the work of Saidiya Hartman, this research employs a critical fabulation to explore African diasporic cultural and political influences during the Harlem Renaissance. Harlem Roses examines African diasporic sensibilities in 1920s Harlem, shaped by the Great Migration, as my friend identified, as well as a growing era of Pan-Africanism at the turn of the 20th century, the peripatetic movement of African and Caribbean seafarers, as well as what Claude McKay once called a universal time, or a time of universal excitement. So this research project utilizes methods from Black studies, transnational feminism, surveillance studies, Black geographies, as well as a queer of color critique. And today I want to introduce parts of this research by sharing 3 case studies that I'm working through in this project. When author Abdi Latif Ige arrived in Harlem, it did not take him long to encounter a scent reminiscent of home. It was 1987. He was a musician and student pursuing a degree in music theory. The scent, an oil sold across stores in Uptown, was called Harlem Rose, but it was also known by another name, Somali Rose, due to its traditional ingredients: frankincense, sandalwood, anise, musk, and a twist of green moss. For Ige, who has lived in Harlem for 40 years, the smell brought into focus the long histories of Somalis in New York City as far back as the 18th century. There are scientific links between smell and memory. Scents transmit olfactory signals through our limbic systems, and out of all the senses, smell triggers our sites of memory the most, taking us back to our first encounters. According to some of the neighborhood's elders, this Somali scent arrived in Harlem through a man named Haji Satin Yusuf. He came to New York long before Ige did. A Somali seafarer, he moved to the city in 1911 for work. He helped build MTA subway stations, including Jamaica Station, to support himself. He also found other hustles. Satine was not isolated when he arrived at the turn of the 20th century. He met with a dozen other Somali Roses who'd made a home in Harlem. Satine lived in the city for 6 decades before passing away in the late 1970s. He was a mentor to the many Somali elders still present in New York. And one of his mentees, Dahir, has lived in New York for 56 years now. He arrived in 1969 as a teenager, when waves of Somali seafarers joined him during this decade. These new city dwellers looked to older heads for mentorship, and Satine was an influence on Dahir, who admits to being a troublemaker at the time. Satine provided guidance, and Dahir is one of the few people who hold his oral history. There we go. Dahir found ways to take care of his mentor too. He was Satine's companion during trips to doctor appointments in Chinatown, and this required lengthy subway rides from uptown. He would then watch Satine stomp, cane in hand, through downtown, and Satine would yell to anyone within earshot about the mass gravesite of enslaved Africans below them. He would spend these trips telling a younger Dahir the great details about the history of Africans and Somalis in New York, and with these stories, he offered him maps of Black life throughout the city. It was during one of these trips that Dahir learned about one of Satine's friends, Moomin Hersey, who left during the Great Depression. Hersey's story stuck with Dahir for many decades in the city. Hersey's story was rare to him. He was one of the few early Somali seafarers who returned home. It was June 6 of 1925 when Moomin Hersey landed in New York through the city's ports. He settled in Harlem in the 1920s, the height of the neighborhood's renaissance. A seafarer since World War I, he'd long made a home out of the ocean. At the peak of the Harlem Renaissance, as the preceding Great Depression brewed, he found a home. His ordinary life mirrored the detours and routes of the migration. A nomad from Bedbetta, he swam his way into being part of the first wave of Somalis in America. Along the way, he formed bonds with other Somali roses in Harlem, and it didn't take Moomin Hersey long to meet Haji Satine Yusuf, a friend from his decades in the city. As we know, Harlem's Black diasporic presence was undeniable in the 1920s. By the late 19th century, African, Caribbean, and Asian seafarers arrived at ports across America without tickets, passports, or portfolios. Immigrants and seafarers from colonized territories developed long-lasting communities in different corners of the city. And for Black migrants in and outside of America, Harlem still remains home. You hear traces of this history of African seafarers during the Harlem Renaissance in Claude McKay's writing. The Jamaican-born author and poet wrote a novel in the early 20th century, Romance in Marseille, which was only published in the last 5 years. McKay had published the Harlem movement's first substantial book of poetry, Harlem Shadows, in 1922, and 6 years after that, his novel, Home to Harlem, had enjoyed multiple printings as the Harlem Renaissance first American bestseller. The novel Romance in Marseille works through migration movements across the globe as a seafarer. The protagonist, Lafala, befriends a role model, a seafarer by way of Nigeria, based on a real-life character McKay actually met in Marseille. This individual also influenced a minor character in his novel Banjo, a roman à clef of McKay's nomadic circle of other Black drifters in the south of France. McKay's stories inspired by real people give us tracings of the African diaspora during the lost generation. The 1920s became the high season of the Jazz Age, the Harlem Renaissance, and the New Negro. It was also the era of the high seas Black stowaway. This decade liberated millions from the mechanized slaughter of the Great War, which became, as per Claude McKay, a time of universal excitement. As Romance in Marseille explains it, I quote, "Even among Negroes, there were signs of a stirring, and from the New World, a dark cry of back to Africa came over the air. The blooming desire of New World Blacks for reconnection with Africa and of Africans for reconnection with their new and old world kin assumed many institutional forms," end quote. This kinship and diasporic collaboration amongst black drifters from the south of France to Harlem is long and still present. Seafarers, wanderers, and passages from Sudan, Morocco, Senegal, Nigeria, Jamaica, Panama, and so many other locations aren't so hidden in 19th and 20th century archives and writings. Ethiopian seafarers, for instance, present in 1809 in Harlem, led a protest walking out against a racially segregated church setting, collaborating with Black Americans from the South who had traveled from the Great Migration, together forming an independent congregation. This then became the Abyssinian Baptist Church, which is argued to be one of the first churches, or one of the first Black churches in New York City. Somali seafarers arrived in the city during the 19th century and found various areas to congregate during difficult times. They predominantly lived in West Harlem, along West 116th and Manhattan. They took long strolls together to find work. They found communities and cafes, and at the corner of Cornelia Street in Greenwich Village was Cafe Aladdin. From the 1930s to the 1970s, it was a cornerstone in the lives of many African migrants. Somali seamen formed their conclaves, such as the Somali Hajj Yusuf's shoe shine stand, which was on 125th Street, or tables at the African Quarter, which was a cafe in Brooklyn. Many of these seamen who arrived in early 20th century America didn't return to the shores that brought them. Their wanderings through city life were cut short. Economic disparities, immigration detention, premature death, and the afterlives of slavery shaped their destinies. There are stories of men who died impoverished and alone, never returning to their lands of birth. And we may never know if they intended to return. Their archives only leave us with speculation. A few men escaped through the same seaports they entered the city through, and one of those is Moomin Hersey. Hersey briefly rented a room in a house with other Black Harlemites. The home was owned by a Euro-American woman who was financially in need of tenants. The European history of Harlem was still adjusting to the Great Migration. For work, Hersey traveled daily to Midtown and downtown, exploring work opportunities in high-rise buildings, spaces people in his neighborhood couldn't enter as a patron amidst Jim Crow. He worked as an elevator operator at the Empire State Building when its doors opened in 1931. In his spare time, he took strolls, finding places to play billiards and dominoes. He made friends and met with others, such as Haji Satin Yusuf, the man who created the Somali rose scent. Seafarers relied on one another in their community during political and economic strife. Some lived a double life, such as Moomin Hersey, using an alias to subvert strict immigration laws. One eventful night changed everything for Moomin Hersey. After living in the city over a decade under an alias, his time abruptly ended. It was the mid-1930s and the Great Depression was at its peak. Hersey, who was now in his 30s after a decade in New York, was operating an elevator inside a residential Manhattan building. One late night, he welcomed a tenant into the elevator, and it was seemingly an uneventful meeting in their ordinary lives. Unbeknownst to them, on that night at 2 a.m., 3 strangers quietly followed the tenant into the lobby. As the elevator door closed, Hersey heard several shots as he watched the tenant's body drop. Hersey, albeit in shock, escaped unscathed. Both in court and later to his children, he recalled the cries of the tenant's wife and 4 daughters in the building's lobby. A subsequent trial shaped Hersey's life in the coming months and years. It also shaped the inevitable end to his double life in the city. Although he pleaded to not witness the identities of the suspects, he was now a witness to a mob murder. The tenant, a mob boss, had a loyal gang. Hersey quickly became a target of their surveillance. Members would follow him home to ensure his loyalty. And one day, after blindfolding him outside of work, they drove him to a basement at an unknown destination. Other mob members greeted him. They bribed him with hush money. The continuous visits were a reminder that they knew where he worked and lived. Even when the court case wrapped up, the harassment remained. It was then that Hersey accepted his only solution. Using the savings he'd gathered from mob bribes, he'd left New York for good. Moomin Hersey left behind dozens of friends, the many Somali seamen who never left Harlem. I'm now going to shift towards the second case study. So this photograph is a sample of some of my findings in the archives of Ellis Island, which was once one of the busiest immigration, inspection, and processing stations in the United States. So from 1892 to 1954, Ellis Island saw over 12 million immigrants from every region across the globe pass through this small island. So in this photo, there are 20 migrants, as you can see, all dressed in traditional attire, and this is a photograph of them after their arrival to New York. So if you consider the weather conditions and how dire traveling through the sea at this time would have been, there's not a lot of practicality in their style of dress, which I'll address. So these photographs are captioned with dates of arrival, pictorially captured. So this image is captioned. These images in particular are captioned Abyssinians from Somaliland with the date March 14th, 1914. And the photographer's name that's found across these images, or of many of the images at Ellis Island, is that of Augustus F. Sherman. So some photographs include his peculiar descriptors for these newcomers, often inaccurate and embedded with colonial framing of another. And you can see through many of his other descriptions of other communities as well too, that Sherman made sweeping generalizations about immigrant histories. So during his tenure as a registry clerk with the Immigration Division of Ellis Island, Sherman systematically photographed more than 200 families, groups, and individuals. At the same time, these individuals were then detained by customs for special investigations. And many of his photographs incorrectly identify the ethnic identities of individuals or groups, and many do not include the actual names of the individuals visually captured, just ethnic identifiers. And these archives reveal an unsettling narrative of passage for this group from the Horn of Africa to the United States. So within 3 months of their arrival, March 14th, 1914, this group of Somalis were relocated to Brooklyn, then Chicago, where they began a tour of being exhibited in a human zoo. And there's an advertisement that I found from Chicago's The Billboard newspaper, which is, we now understand as Billboard magazine. The most remarkable ethnographic educational exhibit ever shown to the civilized world. Earth's most curious people shown in their native haunts and daily pursuits. An impressive congress of savage people gathered from Earth's dark corners and the innermost recesses of its primeval nations. These strange specimens of humanity will be seen in their native village at Dreamland, Coney Island, commencing Saturday, May 9th, 1914. The above attraction will play a few fairs after the close of the Coney Island season prior to its opening at the Panama Pacific Exposition, San Francisco, California. So this group of Somalis had joined a German merchant, Karl Hagenbeck, on exhibition tours as early as 1885. And in Germany, where he was a merchant in the industry of wild animals and entrepreneur of many European zoos, he decided in 1874 to transfer this work towards exhibiting humans, starting off with exhibiting Samoans and Sami people as purely natural populations. 2 years later, by 1876, he sent a collaborator to Sudan to bring back some wild beasts and Nubians. And then by 1914, his production encountered this group of a Somali family wandering in diaspora, arriving at Ellis Island on a fiction of opportunity. They arrived to be exhibited, they were promised pay, which they failed to receive before being shipped back home. I'm now moving towards case study 3, the final case study. There are many Black Americans from the 20th century who also hold the histories of African seafarers. And one of these elders, Daoud Haroun, shared some of this history before his passing in 2018. Haroun was born in 1934 in pre-World War II Boston, Massachusetts, his name then being John Mansebo Lewis. He had a lifelong interest in music, history, and religion, and archived his history and how the Somali community influenced him. Haroun's story illuminates how Black political and cultural life in the US was shaped by collaborations and kinships ignited by early 20th century African and Caribbean seafarers. Hussein Ali bin Musa, which is the story that Daoud Haroun actively shared through his work. Hussein Ali bin Musa arrived in Boston in the 1930s and became a familiar name and face in the Black community of Roxbury. He worked as a house painter and a home decorator. And after arriving at the port of Boston with the identification card of a Yemeni seaman, he made friends with a tailor shop owner. It was there that a young Daoud Haroun was growing. Haroun was a child when he first met Musa at his father's shop. He later grew to call him his uncle. Musa regularly attended Haroun's family home for dinner after a hard day's work. And despite it being the midst of the Great Depression, they fed him. Musa became known as a generous and honest house guest who always brought more food than he ate. It was Haroun's mother who explained to her son that this was an act of generosity, that Musa's abrupt way of leaving their family home was modesty, an Islamic practice. He was bowing out after being humbly fed enough at a time when many were starving. A great first lesson in adab, Haroun later wrote of Musa. I quote, "This Black African man soon became a legendary character in Boston, and many stories were told about his mysterious past in Africa." End quote. The influence of Musa's life and spirituality was significant for Haroun, who eventually converted to Islam. He also became an ethnomusicologist, and in his work, he explored African diasporic and spiritual sounds. He founded an Islamic education center in Houston and often taught African music and African histories and spiritualities to the various institutions that he passed. Towards the end of his life, in his essay, Flow of Baraka, Haroun admitted his encounter with Musa shaped the trajectory of his life. I quote, "In retrospect, it was if, by some strange and mysterious act of kindness, Allah had sent me a gift in the person of Ali Musa," end quote. After 3 decades of friendship, Musa died in Mattapan State Hospital in Massachusetts on June 8, 1959, leaving behind 1 daughter and a great impact on Haroun. The writings Haroun left behind reveal a history of Somali organizing in New York City during the mid-20th century as decolonization movements were expanding across Africa. Haroun often wrote about a man named Ibrahim Gulaid, a Somali diplomat who would meet at Cafe Aladdin, the cafe I mentioned earlier in Greenwich Village, for coffee with other Somali seafarers. He heard of this through Musa's many stories, and it was here in that neighborhood that he met Ibrahim while delivering a letter on behalf of Musa. As a child, Haroun helped translate messages from Musa, who knew little English, into letters. He would then help him mail these letters to different destinations in the US, but also sometimes overseas, such as England. He later realized that these messages and letters were always intended for other Somalis in diaspora, and the letters he translated were always concerning decolonization in their homeland against the Italians, the French, and the British. Haroun recalls in his writings specific letters being sent to a Somali man in Chicago who used an alias, Charlie Brown. Mr. Brown was the disguised name of a Somali man named Mohammed who lived in Chicago. Musa and Charlie Brown exchanged many letters over the years, sometimes enveloped with cash, despite their economic precarity at the time, all in efforts to support anti-colonial movements back home. Haroon wrote, "One man's handwriting I remember the most, and that was of a man who called himself Charlie Brown. These letters that appeared to be written by a child because of their awkward scrawl usually had money in them. Usually when I finished reading them, Musa would take me to a bank where I would buy money orders, and then I would address these letters to someone in England with my own childish scrawl and take them to the post office to be sent off. Musa would then take me to a sweet shop, and we would celebrate with ice cream and soda. And if I were really lucky that day, he would tell me a story. I remember that he liked telling stories about camels, and he would sometimes bring me small boxes of dates that had a picture of a camel on the label. Ever since those days, I've always liked the sight of camels, and I particularly love dates. Each Ramadan, when the sun sets, I remember him. It wasn't until years later that after I'd moved to New York City and met Hassan, the owner of Cafe Aladdin, did I understand the historical importance of those early walks with Mr. Mousse, the letter readings and the visits to the bank and the post office. It was during this time and during many of our later conversations did I learn that I had unknowingly served in the transfer of money to support the Somali resistance. That Ali Musa was one of the many young men who had been sent out of the country to raise funds for the resistance, and that Somalis and their sympathizers lived in many cities across the world." End quote. These seafarers were geographically estranged, but never emotively or politically left home. Haroon's lessons from Musa impacted him in many ways, especially his spirituality. Haroon converted to Islam, which he says shaped the music, philosophy, and theory he developed through his life. Musa introducing Haroon to Islam shaped the young man's arrival to the world and expression, who blended art and spirituality in his work. Haroon eventually became a band member for Sun Ra, for instance, where he embedded African diasporic sounds and spiritualities, shaping his personal and artistic life. He taught at Wesleyan University about the African diaspora and Islam in his music theory. Haroon is also the older relative, or is also a relative, an elder of Ernest Dickerson. I think this skipped, apologies. So Ernest Dickerson is the American cinematographer known for films such as Juice and other canonical Black American cinema. Haroon had 2 children. The first was born on the 25th night of Ramadan, who's on the very right. And Haroon named his first child Musa Ramadan in honor of the time of his birth, as well as the great influence Musa had on him, a seafarer who wandered from Somalia and into his life in Boston. In an essay about the history of Somalis, Haroon wrote, "I conclude in the same way as I began, by confessing my debt to those brave men and women who emerged from the Horn of Africa and were responsible for the spread of the light of Islam and true friendship throughout the world." End quote. The story of Haji Satin Yusuf, Mumin Hirsi, and Ali bin Musa evoke the peculiar ways in which Somali diasporic wanderings have impacted Black spiritual and cultural life in the Americas. They remind us of the transnational kinships and relationality that shapes Blackness between and beyond borders. Their stories remind us also of how seafarers deemed colored as flaneurs and clandestine travelers maintained their roots, belonging, iman, culture, and creativity as they subverted borders to live their ordinary Black lives across the diaspora. After Mumin Hirsi left New York City in 1939, he served in World War II, settled in other places, all before returning home. He continued working as a seafarer for the British. He was a factory worker in Sheffield after World War II until the 1950s. And it was in 1955, after almost 60 years of being at sea, that he retired, according to his seaman discharge book. He returned to Hargeisa to join his wife, and together they had 7 children and over 40 grandchildren. And at the turn of the 21st century, his descendants dispersed across the globe. He circled over 5 times as a seafarer. Many of his grandchildren live in the colonial cities he once escaped, in the countries he once proclaimed he would never raise his Black children. Why would I, when I could raise them in their ancestral land? He once said to his daughter, long before he passed, and not too long before Somalia would suffer its toughest of wars, resulting in a genocide, a refugee crisis, and a loss of home. I've spent some time researching Moomin Hersey's global archive, but I also know his life intimately. A century after his arrival, I became his granddaughter, his first grandchild to settle into the city that chased him out. A scent created by a Somali migrant through contraband during the Great Wars has now become a sensory part of the Black fabric in America. It reveals how transnational Blackness is if we trace these oils that are offered all across Uptown in Harlem and the different borders that they compel us to consider and cross. There's a proverb that highlights a Somali reliance on oral history and a focus on the sensory. I would say it in Somali right now, but I'm going to butcher it, and because I'm being recorded, I'll just say it in English. The ear is older than the eye. Oral histories teach us about people, places, sounds, scents, lifestyles, and pasts we cannot see. Oral histories offer us sensory archives as a means of transmitting memory beyond official records. And as the Somali proverb goes, in the womb, we hear the world before we lay eyes on it. The many individuals whose stories shape this research are those who were part of a generation known as the Lost Generation. The name describes those who came of age during or shortly after World War I, disillusioned by the horrors of the Great War, and another to come. This generation experienced disorientation, wandering, and being directionless. They also endured a loss of faith in traditional values. And as this postmodern global world expanded through enslavement and colonialism, these flaneurs and high seas Black stowaways were lost between borders, wars, globalization, and the old world being replaced by a new order. This generation was born during and after the Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885, as occupation swept their ancestral lands in Africa and European ships arrived at their shores. The rise of nationalism and its subsequent great wars led to an era of wanderers deemed colored, without tickets, passports, or portfolios, that they were swimming, dancing, walking, searching, and subverting borders. What can we hear or remember of them? Haji Satin Yusuf, Ali bin Musa, Moomin Hersey, his real name was Ahmed Hassan, as well as Claude McKay and this era of drifters and high seas Black stowaway, give us a glimpse of this wandering in diaspora, but there are also other names as well. I've learned of far too many seafarers in my research who arrived in North America in search of opportunity, yet were met with premature death. Their stories wandered these neighborhoods as well too. All of their memories give us an optic into the ghosts of Manhattans, as well as North America's long migrant and colonial afterlife. These seafarers left us sensory mappings to trace, trails through scents, sounds, and maps as they strolled in and through the city, the intersections around us, walking against dominant structures and systems. How does this walking, seafaring, scent-making as memory and oral history tell us a different story of New York City and North America? How do these sensations left behind by Black drifters surface hidden archives? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. This is an inspiring research. Please just note your questions down. There will be a room for you to ask your questions to Huda. We'll just move straight to take the conversation from Jean-Claude Rose. You're welcome. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Just gonna get right into it. Maybe I'll take that pointer. Yeah. Okay. So my research is not really related to Black history, Black culture, or Black experience. I came to be involved in a project that I will discuss here, which is related to Black history through a series of chance circumstances. My training is in cinema and film production, and my background as a cine artist is in experimental filmmaking. It's kind of a very niche area of cinema. But I do acknowledge as a teacher, a longtime teacher, that films have impact. They can convey powerful messages to wide audiences. They shape the way we see the world and our place in it. But cinema comes with significant limitations. It's an industry with many gatekeepers, from production to distribution. Access is an issue because of money, gender, and race. But even with barriers removed, it's becoming increasingly difficult to mobilize a viewer's attention and engagement when the pervasiveness of media is so all-encompassing, and when our focus, unfortunately today, on anything is too often only equal to the time spent watching. It's a reality I couldn't ignore in my work, and it is what has motivated me to undertake research in other ways of creating and deploying cinematic content. And the reason I'm giving you all this preamble is because it factors into what happens afterwards. So eventually, many years ago here at Concordia, I partnered with a graduate student from the Faculty of Engineering and Computer Science, and I described to him my vision for a new relationship between viewer and cinematic content. Lucky for me, this student was particularly sensitive to the language of art, which engineers are not always sensitive to. So we were able to establish a very interesting relationship. For years, we worked on developing a platform where we reimagined this relationship between viewer and movie or content. We reimagined it as an exchange or a dialogue of some sorts where viewer and content shaped each other. Many other students, and I put up this still of some of the group members that were involved in that work back then. Many students helped and participated over the years, and that meant getting computers, the machines and computation, the logic, the software, involved in the tool palette of film production. Naturally, the concept of interactivity came into play, but we decided that the viewer should not be interacting by making choices or driving the content by using a joystick, a keyboard, or any kind of direct physical contact. The content on the screen needed to read the viewer the same way that the viewer reads the image. So it needed to have a mind of its own, an intelligence or agency. This was like almost 15 years ago. When I said those words, people laughed at us. Intelligence, what are you talking about? Obviously today with AI that's so prevalent, this is not an issue that much anymore. So the film would modify itself in reaction to the viewer's presence. At first, we worked with sensors, but eventually we settled on a small camera as the eye of the content. We had barely finally developed a working prototype that we called the door, which we can see here. I'll put up another still. Just as my multi-year funding was running out. Mohammed, the student that I was, the engineering student that I was working with, had graduated and he was moving on to his professional life. I was becoming a father once and twice, and the project just sat on a shelf, and essentially we both moved on. But we made contact again 3.5 years ago. Mohammed reached out after relocating back to Montreal. His work had taken him abroad for several years. He had now a small family and was working as an engineer on several AI-related products. He was collaborating with research groups at several reputable universities as well, US universities as well. So first, he convinced me that from his current working experience, what we had been doing more than 10 years ago was surprisingly advanced and that we should restart our development. Then sometime after that, he told me that while he was working at Harvard, he collaborated with another engineer whose name is Peter Fay, who was involved in the Newport, Rhode Island Middle Passage Memorial Project. Peter is an engineer, but he's also a historian. So we had a first discussion, and well, actually before that first discussion, Mohammed had spoken about our research in interactive cinema to Peter, and he immediately expressed interest in perhaps integrating this into the memorial. So we had a first meeting. I had a first meeting with Peter, and I came up with a first concept. But before I had to educate myself, which I confess to having been quite ignorant about this very large slice of history. The Newport Middle Passage Memorial Project received a public endorsement by a kind of a very established figure, Dr. Henry Louis Gates, the historian, filmmaker, and director of the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research at Harvard. So the folks of we don't have to go to the website, by the way, but the folks at the Newport Memorial Project had commissioned a design by a duo of architects, Julian Bonder and Marianne Thompson, that came up with a design for a spot in Newport called Liberty Square. Their design was, the design was based on this idea of a number of very high and narrow rows, passages lined with giant blocks of timber, in part as an inspiration from the blocks of timber that ships in those days were made of. And in 2019, the Newport Middle Passage project was awarded recognition as a UNESCO Site of Memory by Ali Musa Iye, Chief of Section of History of Memory for Dialogue at UNESCO. I learned that 40% of US-owned ships that transported slaves were from Newport. I also learned that there were at least 730 known crossings that originated from Newport. And this was part of my education. And it did shock me. I also learned that the only existing memorial to the slave trade in the world was in Nantes, France. And I learned this obviously from Peter. And I understood that this is a history that concerns all of us. So I made a pitch to the folks from the Middle Passage group, and I'm going to go through the proposal. I'm going to explain the proposal I made and subsequently the kind of prototypes we developed, and then to end my presentation, where we are right now and what's happening going forward. So we proposed installing, and I know all this might sound a little bit kind of odd and weird, but maybe when the questions come, you can ask me to explain a little bit more. This is obviously not traditional cinema projection in a theater. So we propose to install 2 screens in open public spaces. The screens should be placed at ground level and should have a size that equals that of a large window or door opening. They should stand upright, which means in portrait mode, vertical. And the screens should appear as openings into another dimension, another parallel space that coexists along ours. So they exist in public space, and they're just like a way of peering through history, if you like. But they exist for a duration, and they're on all the time, 24 hours, and every day that the show is up. The screens are equipped with camera sensors that can analyze their environment. So it kind of looks something like this. We did like a few mock-ups because obviously we're trying to talk with all kinds of partners to make this happen. It would look like this, and the 2 screens should be in proximity to the memorial. Actually, I'll show you exactly where we wanted to place them. They must stand alone and not against the wall. So they're in 3-dimensional space. They're facing away from each other, and they're separated by a space of up to 10 feet. They offer a view into a fictional space. From each side, viewers can see the foreground of the image, and at the back of this image, they can see the back of the image from the other side. And when you go to the other side, well, you see the reverse angle, and you see the back of the other image. So 2 screens of approximate human dimension stood in portrait mode. We have to feel that we can just walk in, right? So the characters in the screen are the same size as us. They're facing away from each other, and they're separated by a space of up to 10 feet, and they offer this view into fictional space. So this is what I proposed to the Middle Passage group. On one side will be the front view into the interior of the hull of a ship, populated with the tightly packed bodies of enslaved people making the crossing from America or Europe to the Americas, standing, crouching, pacing, enduring the harsh conditions of brutal maritime transport. From the other side, a figure comes and goes, stands, reads, recites. We're thinking here of putting to contribution historians, poets, African American, African Canadian, historians, poets, readers that walk into that space and recite stories, narrate poetry, etc. This is actually the original concept. It has evolved since. The viewers can walk from one side to the other or walk through between the screens, because the space between the screens is essentially a transgression because we're walking into the virtual space of the ship. So these are all mock-ups, obviously, that we use for our presentations, just to give an idea. Obviously, this one here represents the installation inside and not outside, and there are reasons for that that I'll touch upon maybe later. And the reverse view would be something like this. So we use the figure of Dr. Gates here just for the sake of, making people kind of recognize a familiar and established figure, but it doesn't mean that he will be participating in this project. So I'm going to play this kind of animation that spins around the, come back. Can you play it? Okay, you get the picture. This is challenging on many levels, but it's something that, like I said, we developed the technology for this, and we're pretty confident that we can put this together. So another kind of mock-up of how the installation, for example, would function inside a dedicated space. Because that's the other option we're working with. So Liberty Square is in central Newport. In 1776, Newport, Rhode Island was the 5th largest city in the US. It's a small town now. It's a small coastal town. It's a very kind of it's a place where very wealthy, mostly white people have mansions, and movie stars are there and so on. I don't know if you're familiar with this part of the northeast of the US, but that's what Newport is like. But so this is like this little square, and you see River Lane to your right on the right-hand image, and we propose to install the screens on the River Lane. So in that little square, the memorial with the large passages of timber would be installed, the tree would be kept, and we proposed River Lane, which on the image to the left is on your left, on the image to the right is on your right. And it would look something like this. We thought the street and the location of it has this kind of very intense, very kind of theatrical feel to it, and we proposed that the screens could be installed there and framed a little bit to protect them from the elements inside these metal casings. So this is the pitch we made. Duration of the installation, seasonal, spring to fall. The reason for that is that time span reflects the length of a voyage across the ocean. The time that a ship crossed from Africa or Europe to the eastern coast of the Americas. So the idea is that over the span of these 4 months, the evolution of the characters in the installation occurs, and it relates to their plight at the same time. So in the spring months, obviously, they're in a very different state than 4 months later. And we all know that there were a lot of death during those transports, and the conditions were horrendous. So this is something we want to address. But we also want to avoid graphic, very kind of dramatic, movie-like representations that are meant to shock or outrage. We avoid that overly dramatized content, and that's not our objective. We want to use minimal set design and expressive lighting designed to create atmospheres rather than aim for realistic representations. So we're not pretending to look inside the ship, but we're trying to just suggest that space. So the duration and the gradual deterioration due to the brutality of the crossings. So the folks at the Middle Passage group were very interested, and we agreed that the platform is particularly suited to the memorial project. The 2 screens that are placed alongside the architectural proposal will be hosting these spectral figures of the slave trade. The screens act as passageways, portals to a parallel space, which mirrors a little bit the work of the architects in the square itself. And it's inhabited by the spirits of the peoples taken against their will and transported in the hull of a vessel. And then the installation according to us anyways, brings into contact, literally face-to-face, these protagonists of past history with the present-day protagonists of a history in the making. They gave us a tentative agreement to go forward, but they were also kind of puzzled by how this works. This is not cinema, so what's the experience here? What happens? What are people supposed to get from this? It's going to last several months. No one is going to stay several months watching those screens. They're going to pass by, they're going to watch a few minutes, maybe half an hour, they're going to move on. But this is precisely the concept behind this, is that it's something it's there in your public space, and you come by it on a regular basis, and you see it evolve in front of your eyes. So they said, could you make something that we could, look at and get a better sense? And this is when I reached out to Angelique Wilkie, that you may know of, obviously. And we, obviously, I have the role of a producer and a developer in this. The content, I'm not creating the content. I want to leave this in the hands of people whose history this is. So the idea is to collaborate with artists from the Black community, dancers, performers, filmmakers, historians, poets, and so on, to craft this whole kind of very, very complex content that we would run over the period of 4 months. So as a first step, I reached out to Angelique, and I explained the project, and she was gracious enough to submit herself to the very complicated way of acquiring this kind of material, because we film as in traditional cinema, but it has to be done a very specific way in order to function in that system. So it takes a lot of waiting, repeating, knowing your position in space, and so on. And she improvised a performance that we broke down and placed into the system and used it as our prototype. We made a short film to explain all of this and to give a sense of what it would look like. And I believe it's in this. So I'll let it play, And then after that, I can comment a little bit on it. You good? Yeah. Okay, thanks. So it's, I hope it explains itself, but what you need to know is that we shoot a lot of material and a lot of reactions. So for every presence of one character or multiple characters, we shoot 4, 5, 6, 10. We can do as many as we like. Different outcomes. And then the inputs that were illustrated is the camera essentially analyzing the behavior. We can see if someone is actually paying attention or not, if there are children or mostly adults, if there are males or females. It can go all, like very far. We can determine a lot more details about people in front of the screen. And then we obviously, Mohammed, not me, but according to the instructions that we developed over time, we created this intelligence that takes all this information and then reacts to it. So if there's no one in front of the screens, well, the character may just stop moving or go and rest or sit down or not turn towards the outside of the screen. But then if someone comes along, 2 people, 3 people, then they may turn over and act in a way that acknowledges the presence of a viewer. The thing here is that nobody's looking at each other from another side of a piece of glass. So it's not like we're waving and they're waving back, but there's this acknowledgement of presence and a reaction to that presence. And this is where it becomes interesting because the system sort of learns and eventually starts kind of making out its own kind of responses to the viewership that's in front of the screen. It also reacts to the time of day, the weather conditions, and so on and so on. So generally speaking, this is what this would look like. I think there were a few more slides. After this discussion, the folks from the Middle Passage group sort of started contacting other groups that might be interested. This is one of them. I don't know if you're familiar with this resource online, Slave Voyages, but they became interested in the project. There's other groups that were interested, the Anchukaj, Guadeloupean Historical Preservation Group also became interested, and others. So we're looking at potentially, if this goes forward, to place those screens not just in Newport, Rhode Island, but in other places as well. Challenges. Unfortunately, the original memorial site, Liberty Square, was not approved in the end. It came very close after it was almost 2 years of positive negotiations, and there was even a sign placed in the square announcing the memorial and obviously the architectural project. But the city council backed down from it, and instead they offered another space in Newport. So back to the drawing table, we're going to have to, as much for the memorial itself, the construction, but that other space doesn't allow us to have this back street where we would place the screens. But there's also the fact that screens in public spaces can be seen as a provocation, either because of their content or simply because they are easy targets for vandalism. This is a reality we're very much aware of, especially since a lot of things have changed in the past 3 years. And then the other important factor or challenge is cost. Funding the production of the video and sound content, and the on-site technical maintenance and upkeep of the equipment, and the maintenance of the site itself. The thing is that everything we are doing resides in a cloud. There's nothing other than a screen and a camera that needs to be in the space itself. But, stuff happens to machinery in public spaces, even if they are housed inside of a dedicated space. So that's why I showed these mock-ups inside a more kind of gallery or museum-like space, because that might be an option for us going forward. So that's pretty much the project, and we can eventually talk a little bit more if you have questions about how that technology works, or what are the creative steps going forward. So I'll be happy to answer your questions.
All right. Thank you. I think this is an interesting topic, interesting discussion we had here this afternoon. It is now time for us to ask questions, to dissect and really understand the project, if you have any question. But first of all, since the mic is in front of me, I will ask my questions before I open it up for the floor. So my first question that I'll be asking will go to Dr. Huda. Actually want to understand the motivation, what motivated you to engage in these archival photos, archival documents in your presentation. And then to also understand the Somali seafarers moving to the Americans. Is there any connection between that of the transatlantic slave trade from West Africa to the Europe and to America? Is there any connection between the two? I think Dr. Jane, I will ask, I just want to find out, I have some few questions here I want to know. Very interesting, I really like the bringing history to life of this project, trying to reconnect the past with the present. At least there are most of this young generation who has no background in history. Based on this screen, they'll be able to connect themselves with things that happened in the past and how they resonate with it. That's an interesting project. One thing I wanted to really understand, the screen, the information that will be given to the screen, is this going to be something that you people are going to prepare, you people are going to film and then feed it into the screen? And two, I'm also looking at, in fact, you talk about the cost, but also you also talk about vandalism, but also looking at the project, the screen, mounting it in public space, and maybe somebody coming to taking it away, stealing it, it happens. We have people like that who are motivated, looking at the cost, looking at the project, how expensive it is, maybe they can make few dollars from it. Did we also consider that one too as well in this project? Thank you very much.
You want to go first? I'm going to try to remember the questions, but the first one I believe is about the inspiration for the project. Yes. So to put it plainly, as I was working on my doctoral research, which was very much focused on the criminalization of Somalis here in Canada in a very 1990s context in relation to the criminalization of the Jamaican diaspora that I also grew up witnessing as well in this country as well too. And linking these things to the nationalistic project that is multiculturalism, which then categorizes our people through a racial hierarchy that uses ethnic identifiers, right? And this is what blurs anti-Blackness, if you will, or understandings of anti-Blackness in this country. But as I was as you know, as a doctoral student, you spend so many of your years and your time obsessing and searching and longing for some sort of understanding and connections between this research question that ignites your project, right? And it was towards the end of my research process during the pandemic, this would be 3 years ago at this point, that I personally became more motivated by I think I started to assess my concern with having spent so much time rationalizing and explaining the humanity of my people in this land, and proving. I think what became important for me was to, especially considering my own family ancestry, was to really help, especially even the context and understanding of the Somali experience here in Canada, that my people, as well as a lot of our people, are not new here, and we are very much framed as, the Somali diaspora is continuously framed and understood as a refugee community, which is absolutely a truth, but there is also more complexity to that as well too. And I think that becomes tied down to nationalism and our understanding of, if we understand Africa and the migrants of our people, or the movement of our people continuously throughout time, we get so caught up in this nationalism of identifying this person from this country and this location, and their experience is different from this experience over here, where in actuality, I do not see many distinctions in many ways. It is also the end of a week, and I haven't had dinner yet, so I don't know if that sounded or made sense, but that was the inspiration of the research. And if you will, personal vengeance. This research starts off with me searching for my grandfather, but through the process, I've learned of the stories of dozens of other Somali roses who passed through America, who made home of America. But what I didn't get to acknowledge or address in today's presentation that is a big component of my project as well too, is that I really do emphasize the title of seafarers and seamen, but these are also individuals who arrived to America, of course, in search of opportunity and forced through the coloniality of the shapings of a new global order. But in many ways, some of the stories I'm finding that are so fascinating are also of individuals who are escaping something as well too, and escaping something personally. I've learned of stories of seamen who died alone in the city, who didn't have a lot of company at their funerals, for instance, because they were found murdered in one of the queerest parts of Manhattan. That illuminates and helps us understand that these are also queer and trans histories as well too, and these are gendered histories as well too. So I'll end my ramble.
Yeah, Dr. Jun.
Well, I'll start with the end of your question, which is about potential like removal of the screen stuff. I think there's two things. The steel casing would make them so heavy that it wouldn't be very subtle to try to take off with them. But also when we started doing this kind of stuff 15 years ago, large screens were very precious things that impressed people a lot. Nowadays, they're all over the place. Nobody cares. So I don't think it would be the same thing. But we are concerned with the fact that people could be triggered by the existence of these screens placed that way and with characters potentially looking at them. Let alone, a Black person or something that has to do with slavery. Just having a figure that seems to be aware of your presence and that sort of turns towards you or away from you might trigger people enough to just want to throw something at the screen or any kind of like vandalism. So we're a little bit concerned with this, and a lot of the Middle Passage group is like 14 people, so a lot of them raise that question, that issue. So it's something we have to think about. But I am kind of very attached to the idea of having this in a public space because the impact is very different. It's not a dedicated viewing in a room, a theater. The engagement is very, very different, and I wanted it to be like this whole concept of doing things this way is that it's something that just exists in your daily life, and you encounter it day after day, and the narrative sort of builds on the same time scale as yours. It's not like you watch the movie and there's like 3 months or 10 years in the movie within 2 hours, and that's it. No, the movie is out there and it's happening at the same temporal rate as yours, as ours. And for me, that changes the engagement completely because it's as if, it's kind of this inevitable thing that we have to deal with. And when I stumbled upon this project, I thought this is the best subject that can use this kind of technology. To raise more awareness and to sort of not be able to avoid it somehow. So.
Thank you. So please, we'll now invite questions from the audience and those online. If you're online and you have a question, you just put up your hand and then we'll give you the forum for you to ask your question. Those audience here to come also ask your question. Thank you.
If anyone in the audience has a question, raise your hand. I'll get this to you. But just a note for those on Zoom, you can also use the chat and we'll read your questions out. So please feel free to pop those into the chat now. In the meantime.
Thank you both for a fascinating presentation. I just have one question for each. For Huda, I was struck by one of the labels you showed in the photos. It said Abyssinians from Somaliland. You did mention those labels were often wrong, but I was just curious if there was a pattern to the errors, and was there any stereotype reproduced through those errors, and if those errors have any relevance to the way nationalism has evolved in the region back in East Africa, in your case. I was just struck by that combination of Abyssinia and Somaliland, which often in the history, Abyssinia is up in the north and has its own sort of racial, colonial kind of relationship. That naming of Abyssinias in Somaliland itself evokes. So I was just curious if you had any observations regarding those errors, their logic, and if there is any relationship between those errors and nationalism development in the region. For the film, it's fascinating. I was just curious to learn more about your phrasing of like reaction of the viewer. I know the images you are displaying, there is a sequence and there's algorithm involved in that. Do you have any notion of like reaction from viewers that you are starting off as a base, or do you have a typical reaction and then you kind of model what to screen, or is that completely open and is it going to be shaped by algorithm, if at all? I'm not sure if I understood exactly, but do you have initial ideas of reactions that you would like to fit into the screen, or is that something that you're not really keen to observe or monitor or continuously feed into? Thank you.
Yeah, I guess to answer your question, I did, the Abyssinians from Somaliland became immediately peculiar to me when I first read that descriptor, and as I moved away from the example of the Somali family or the Somali community members that I was looking at, or the East African community members I was looking at, I started to notice a repetition in the coloniality, but also just misunderstandings that Augustus F. Sherman had of the different communities he was interacting with. He's a photographer, and he was a clerk at Ellis Island, but he wasn't a historian or a scholar of any way, shape, or form. So he was just moving off of his own limitations and ignorances and at times racism as well too. And I see that more in the case with a lot of South Asian communities that he's trying to depict in his descriptors as well too. But with the case of Abyssinians from Somaliland, I just figured there was a misunderstanding some way along the process, but at the same time, considering who Abyssinians are, which we associate with Ethiopians and Eritrea, more so, there's also these blurred lines between Somalia and Ethiopia in terms of where we belong, right? And this is the problem of nationalism. So a part of me also didn't become too concerned. I know that these individuals identified themselves as Somali. I understand that it was Augustus F. Sherman's choice to identify them as Abyssinians because of his own limited knowledge. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. Get this question. So his question asked about the notion, the reactions of viewers after the screening.
Yeah, well, thanks for asking this question. It was actually in the earliest days when we started developing the system, we had to find some kind of basic approach to behavioral patterns, right? And without consulting psychologists or anything like this, I mean, I had funding, but not enough to include that many people in the research. We went to basic. We started like looking at basic human interaction, and there are like some simple things as proximity. You see, we're at a certain distance of each other, and if we were to carry a conversation over a long stretch of time, we're going to make it simple, right? Because we're far, and we're actually even going to eventually end it because we don't want to raise our voice all the time, especially if there's a lot of people around us and so on. But if I come closer and even closer, then we enter into this kind of bubble of intimacy, and then all of a sudden we can share more details, more information, be more kind of reveal more things about, what we're talking about and so on. So we just took this basic premise of distance and we created like 3 to 4 zones of intimacy. The very close range, just a bit further, mid and far. And so if we're very far, the screen, the characters in the screen, well, they will acknowledge our presence in passing, or maybe not. If we come closer, that shows an intent to, interact more closely. If we come even closer, then again, there's more engagement. So the material we shoot and we store in a database, the film's database, is built exactly on this first basic premise, right? The closer you come, the more there is an engagement from the screen. And then all of those aspects, like the sounds, I said there's like the sound builds a certain way, it can be louder or become a little bit mute because you're closer. So it's things like this that we use that are very simple, straightforward, verifiable human reactions when there is exchange between humans. Other things are the sound of our voices. If there's silence or hush or, but if people are talking to each other and the tone of the voices rises, well, that sort of attracts attention. Things like this. And surprisingly, they're very effective. Once we coded these things in, the system was able to make interesting choices, right? Obviously, there's no real communication. This is like a fabrication. That's the reality. But the experience is real. And that's what counts for us, is that the viewer will feel that something real happened, even if it didn't. And a good example of that is if you sit at a window and you stare out, and then you sort of like point your attention to one person and start following that person. A whole narrative is going to build in your mind. Oh, she stopped. She's doing 3 steps back. Wait a minute, what is she looking at? Her bags are heavy. And we are, as humans, we are always fabricating stories to interpret the world we live in. So this capacity to put meaning into something that may not have that much meaning is what we're banking on. And I actually think it's very effective. In the tests that we made, people came up with all these like, oh, but this is happening, and this is, this is what I understood, and so on, which I think is in itself a very important result.
Thank you.
I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone with a question from the audience?
Anyone else in the space? Anyone online? Because I didn't see any hands online. Do I have anyone in the chat?
Okay, thank you.
We do have one.
I want to say thank you again to Jean-Claude and Huda. I really enjoyed your presentation. Huda, so I think actually some of what I was going to ask was part of what Sybil touched on. So is this the work you have been doing, which started during your doctoral studies, I believe, and which is still obviously a big part of the work you're doing now. I guess my question is, it does feel like you're still, how they say, en train de faire quelque chose. You're still doing something, like you're headed somewhere with that work, where do you see it going, like in terms of like the future over the next few years? Sometimes it's hard to predict. I know. Sometimes we get surprised in academia and like, oh yeah, I was going this way, but I went this way instead. So I just wanted to know like where you see the project going over the next few years, and then for JC, finally I get to see this project I've heard about for a very long time, and it's really exciting. It took it's taken 15 years, but better late than, than never. I wanted to know if I mean, the work was with Mohammed, the engineer. I wanted to know if in the future you plan on doing, I wouldn't say similar because it's, when you say similar for more context, but I think for me, what captivated me the most was the expression of it and like, you know, the choice of like technology and like screens and like the creativity behind that. So in that, I know you definitely, I mean, experimental cinema is your forte, but in terms of like working in this specific manner, how you went about this project, is that something that you see yourself doing more by yourself without like Mohammed in terms of, let me not say, in terms of building on what you started already, you know? Because I think even speaking with Angelique, I got the idea that the project is not finished or there could still be more that comes out of it. It's there. So I guess maybe my question from my rambling is that I want to know if this is something you plan to take on. I know you always want to work in collaboration with like Black artists, but in terms of like this path with this project, is this something you're always going to do with Mohammed, or is this something that you see yourself like, you know, eventually taken on by yourself and collaborating with artists directly? That was a bit of a ramble, but I think I got a question in there somewhere. All right, thank you.
It's kind of difficult to imagine me going forward without the engineering part because it's so complex. It's artificial intelligence. I have zero training in that. But he doesn't, his task is all the engineering. And, you know, my task is, you know, to make this into something that can be used in a meaningful way. And actually, you know, I'm kind of imprisoned here in my daily activities at the university because we're so busy all the time and we have so much work to do. But he's kind of the freelancer that's gone to work at Harvard, at Brown's. He was in Belgium for a few months. He just came back again from the Netherlands and Belgium because he's working on other projects. And he's always talking to people about this project. And now he always comes back and says, okay, now there's these folks that are interested. I met like one time he was in the US and he came back and said, there's these environmentalists that were introduced to me and they thought, oh, this would be such a great platform to make a film about, you know, the plastics, you know, that are polluting the oceans and so on. So there's a lot of interest. Once people sort of say, can you really do that? They offer to, you know, collaborate on, and I'm very open to this, but the reality is that unless I quit for a year and you know, we run after all these opportunities, it's not gonna happen. So for now, my focus is really this project. It's something that I feel very strongly about. And that's going to take a few years to make also. So, but yeah, I mean, you know, once that platform functions, we're sort of like co-owners of it, if you like. Yeah, I can use it and do anything I want with it. But there's a lot of like little things that can be added depending on what the project is. For this particular project, for example, we want to offer for people to give a contact, an email, right? And they will receive emails from the characters, right? Why? Because we found specifically at with the Slave Voyages archive, there's a lot of letters, for example, and we thought, you know, some of these letters could be sent to someone who visited the installation. It's not addressed to them, but it was addressed to someone, and to be able to be the recipient of this reaching out, this communication, I think could be very impactful. So there's a lot of things like this, adding the, sending emails. We can ask people, right now we're using cameras, but we're not recognizing people. We're using cameras, but what comes into the feed of the camera becomes an abstraction. It just becomes data, if you like. We don't want to look at people, and I think you were asking if it was recorded. It's not recorded. It's always like instantaneous. It's just a camera that sees and gives that information, but nothing stays. The information also disappears gradually, right? But we can offer for people to be recognized if they wanted to, so that when they come back, they are recognized by the character. So all these add-ons would require for someone like him to always be involved.
Yeah, so Huda, I think he's asking about where do you see the project going? I think that's the question. So if you can answer it, then run.
So I guess to keep it as brief as possible, as some of you know, I was brought here, I just moved here from New York as a Canada Research Chair in Black Studies, where I'm hoping to initiate a Black Digital Geographies Lab, and that is, of course, my primary focus right now. As you mentioned in my bio, a lot of my doctoral work and thinking from the past couple of years is coming out in a book, spring of 2027. But as of now, outside of these things manifesting, the exact way I approach all my research can be, if for lack of better language, can be obsessive. I get quite focused on it. I think about it even hearing about your approach to your research and how many years and time it's consumed, right? This is something that these are something we pursue a little bit more intensely and deeply than outside of it just being a product, if you will, for the Academy. But I am going to be returning back to New York in December to begin a fellowship at the Schoenberg, which is the site for Black culture, research in Black culture and Black people through New York Public Library. And I'm really grateful for that because I'll be spending the next 9 months just exclusively in the archives, focusing on this research, but more importantly too, which is something important for me to say because I also rely so much on oral histories through this research as well too. The past 3-4 years, I've built a great deal of community with Somali elders in the city as well too. So part of that is also returning back to them and being part of their lives as well too. It's not just an extractive relationship. I do see them as family in many ways. The last thing I do have to mention, I do have to shout out a sister from New York, a filmmaker, Aisha Jama, who's actually also working on a documentary about this similar research project as well too. So hopefully that will be released in the next year, and that's something I've been working on with her as well. So that's the direction. Hopefully a book will come out in the next couple of years.
I think we'll take the last question and then run up. All right.
Yes, thank you. That was very interesting. I came late, but very passionate discussions from what I gathered. My question might be off topic, but I think it's very contextually relevant considering the time. What is the role of artificial intelligence in your work as intellectual researchers, PhD? There was a report that came out in Canada stating that Black communities are massively and aggressively underfunded by philanthropic organizations that get tax credits, benefits from tax credits, and then will not fund nonprofits. And that research also basically brought to light that it seems to be the same thing also in the academic work. And then some folks thought that artificial intelligence could be a way to democratize access to funding. So I'd be curious to hear both of you, because I heard the gentleman talk about we ran out of funds, right? And we know that in academia, a lot of the Matthew effects apply, where the more funding you get, the more fame you get. The more fame you get, the more funding you get. It creates this kind of like perpetual loop that enables people to research on the same topics, ignore some that they don't want to. White supremacy plays a big role in this, I'm convinced. But anyways, I just love to hear you on this because I find like there's so many great anecdotes that Black communities could share in an oral fashion about what they go through and what they live. But a lot of time, politicians or elected officials, in order to pass laws in Canada, will gaslight us into, well, where's the scientific literature behind what you're talking about? So I'd love to hear you regarding your process when you are grant writing, going after funding, and is there a space for artificial intelligence to help y'all potentially access more funding or not, maybe? Right? I'd just be curious. Maybe it's off topic, but I think it's super important because the work y'all do is obviously amazing and it helps us in the civil society then go to our elected official and say, well, actually, this research says this research says that, so, or this experiment or this social, anyways, am I making sense? No? Okay, thank you.
You want to take it with that?
You start, or yeah, I you want me to. Let's. If we had another hour, I would get into this. But yeah, funding is always an issue. I mean, I consider myself lucky. This partner, Mohammed, obviously he's a professional. He was a student 15 years ago, but now he has a professional career. I don't know how much he gets paid for an hour's work, but I'm sure it's a lot of money, and I get that for free. And I get a 100% commitment. So in a way that is enormous funding, at least for the development stages. And then it's my own time, and I'd rather this than spend hours, weeks and months writing grants that I may or may not get for the reasons you mentioned. So for now, the focus is getting to, having a 100% functional system, and then we'll see, putting something like this together, it's not going to be with research funding. It's probably going to be the more traditional route of, funding for the arts or for cinema. So, I'll pursue that direction when I get there. But for now, as far as research, it's my time and the incredible value of AI software engineer working with you. So.
Yeah, I'm going to try my best to respond. I feel like I would need a little bit more time with your question to answer it more thoroughly, and similar to my friend here, it probably would need another hour. But the way I feel about academic funding is very similar to what I feel about arts funding, which is where I have more of a history from and what I grew up in the communities I guess I grew up in, and the work that I was doing prior to arriving to the academy. The funding structures that we move through in the academy and in an arts world has a coloniality embedded into it, right? Oftentimes this funding is coming from the federal government and serves projects in service of the federal, exactly, right? So that complication is always going to be there, and I have to say that as a Black person and a Black researcher. As for artificial intelligence, I do have to say as a writer, I don't feel comfortable with the title of journalist, but I have committed and produced a lot of journalism in this country and elsewhere. But also as a Black person, I am never for artificial intelligence and do not use artificial intelligence. And that was something I actively taught to my media studies students in New York before I moved here. So that's the best way I can answer that.
All right. Thank you. I think, please, do we have questions online? All right, so we're in it here. Thank you for coming. And I think this is an intriguing conversation that we need to keep it up. And then it's a research that we need to continue doing. I will use this opportunity to introduce the third Black Speaker Series. That will be on the 3rd of February. And it will be moderated by Fernanda Sagado. I don't know if you are here. Okay. And this speaking conversation will be spearheaded by Dr. Lisa Ndejuru and then Dr. Joanna Joachim. I mean, they are those who will be speaking on the 3rd of February next year. Thank you all for coming. We have food behind the screen that we can continue our conversation whilst we are taking some food and some drinks. Then we continue this narration in our heads, in our homes, and in our field of study. Thank you for coming. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you for everyone who joined us in person and online for this conversation. Thank you for activating the space, your comments, your questions, and your presentations. Thank you so much. We're going to go ahead, close up the Zoom and the live stream now, but a quick reminder that this conversation is available on our YouTube channel as of Monday, should you wish to revisit or share it. We hope to see you again in February, March, and April for the rest of this series. So have a great weekend.